welcome to another presentation for the Sound, Music, and Brain Conference. Our presenter this time is Elizabeth Krasnoff. Welcome.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Elizabeth is an intuitive counselor, sound practitioner using sound, biofeedback, intuition, and shamanic tools to help clients relieve their stress and find healthier and happier rhythms in their lives. Elizabeth is a sound researcher, speaker, writer, and singer-songwriter. Her website is sound-medicine.com. What have you been up to lately?
Well, I got a little PhD in the Transformative Studies program at CIIS, where I really went very deep into the field of binaural beats. And so that's been a big undertaking. And I am just now weaving back all that information into my practice. So that's really been the big news this year.
Cool. So I've got the big question, and that is, if you had all the money in the world, how would you help people?
So I really believe in the binaural beats modality as a powerful tool for stress and the hectic pace that we live in today's world. And I think the most effective way to use binaural beats is to have an individual diagnostic system where we can read the thumbprint, if you will, of each individual's brain and be able to create healing sounds for them. They're inexpensive, they're non-invasive, and they are essentially without, like the military study that I have, they said it well. There's no stigma attached. There's no stigma attached to listening to beautiful sound, even if you are a military nurse or a soldier in the middle of your duty. So I think that this would be an incredible gift to the many, which is what I like about it, available for many. That's what I would do.
Cool. Okay, tell us about your presentation.
Okay, so today I'm going to share with you my doctoral research on binaural beats. I'm going to go through the current science, the clinical studies, and what they tell us about binaural beats, how they work, what they can do. And I will offer some research avenues as well to move forward in this field. And we're also going to talk about the auditory brain a bit and a lot about hearing.
Excellent. Great. We'll blast off. I can't wait.
So thank you. So as I said, I am very, very grateful to be here today with my sound healing family and with my own sound teacher, David Gibson. So grateful to be here with you. And I am deeply grateful and appreciative of this incredible community that you have built for us. We can share our knowledge and research and benefit the community, everyone. So let's see, David has already introduced me. The only thing I will add to that is the reason why I have been in this deep path with sound for my whole life is really because of my hearing problems. I'm half deaf, and I didn't find out till I was 19. I have a number of hearing issues, tinnitus, misophonia. And so all of this focus on my hearing really ended up sending me in the direction of the world of sound. And at first as a singer-songwriter, as a musician, as a performer, and then I really started to understand the healing components of sound. And so I certified in all of these really powerful healing modalities with sound as one of the central forces, and tried to begin to understand why is it that sound is so healing? And for me, first in line, it drew me out of isolation, right? I dedicated my doctoral research to Helen Keller. Sound is an incredibly powerful tool for bringing us out of our individual places of isolation. It connects us back to ourselves, that reconnection, and to our community. And so I went into practice, and then I became very, very curious about the science. And that was why I ended up at your school, David, and why I ended up studying the science of binaural beats. Why do they work? Why are they so effective? How is this incredible modality bringing me out of isolation, connecting us back into our rhythms, connecting us back into our community? And so we're going to look at one piece of why that works, and that's a little bit about how I ended up with this inquiry. So with that being said, I'm going to switch over to my slides where you can see for yourself what I'm talking about. So the title of my dissertation, The Effects of Auditory Binaural Beats on Consciousness and the Human Nervous System, a Transdisciplinary Review. And this is my company, Sound Medicine. And when I say ease your journey, I mean that. Sound is probably one of the most serious modalities we can employ to create a gentle and healing rhythm in our lives as we travel through our life path work. So this transdisciplinary review is going to be presented today in 3 parts. The introduction, then I'm going to talk about the methodology, what is a transdisciplinary review, and I will conclude with conclusions and future recommendations in the fields of binaural beats. So for the introduction, we'll start with a statement of purpose. We'll identify the context for this inquiry, and then we'll give some definitions to get on the same page. The purpose of this study is to provide an overview of binaural beats, especially for professionals working in this field, to summarize the progress of binaural beats in the disciplines of health, neuroscience, and psychology. Those are the 3 fields where the research is concentrated right now. We're going to review 26 studies for 18 experimental conditions, and we're going to make recommendations for future research on binaural beats. So let's start here with what are binaural beats. This is my mascot. I call them BB. And BB illustrates that there are 2 different sounds coming in from each ear to blend in the middle and create a signal. So the most recent research that began this contemporary inquiry into binaural beats was published by Dr. Gerald Oster in 1973 in Scientific American. Oster showed that binaural beats exist and that we process this sound differently in our brain. So how do you make a binaural beat? You detune a frequency by a small amount into 2 different frequencies. And that difference tone is the binaural beat. So if you have a frequency of 250 hertz, which is almost middle C, that's 256, and you take that 250 hertz and you put it in the left ear, and then you put, say, 257 hertz in the right ear, so you've now detuned, that central difference frequency, that difference tone of 7 hertz, that becomes the binaural beat. That becomes the frequency that your brain understands as a signal input and begins to work with and regulate, okay? And Oster demonstrated that electrical brainwave patterns respond to these precise frequencies. Oster's research was foundational to the field, and I want to just highlight his 3 main discoveries. Firstly, he taught us that binaural hearing is an actual function of our auditory system. and it is how we locate sound. It is a primary and necessary skill of our auditory system, the ability to locate a sound. Binaural beats, they can help us measure this. That's how binaural beats are processed, in this auditory system in which we can locate sound. 2, he showed us that binaural beats and binaural hearing can be enhanced by noise, okay? And so that teaches us about our skill to sort sound out of a noisy background, hearing a conversation in a restaurant. It's called the cocktail party effect. So binaural beats can help us study that and other brain processes that we're not aware of. Oster's orientation towards binaural beats was that they were a very important tool for learning data about the brain, about the auditory brain. It wasn't until recently that we really dialed in on the clinical aspects of binaural beats. So thirdly, he showed us that binaural beats can help us measure hormonally induced changes that are normally too subtle to be detected. We'll talk more about that. So why is this study useful? Why would we want to know about binaural beats? Well, we're in a time of pretty punishing stress and very painful disconnection. And I think the question is, how do we find healthy rhythms in this somewhat fractured and high tempo pace of modern life? And as I was mentioning before, what we need are inexpensive and non-invasive and easily accessible technologies that help us with stress reduction and wellness techniques. The interest in binaural beats as a technology is clear. If you Google YouTube music with the keywords binaural beats, you will see 12,900,000 hits. So the market has spoken, and it is very interested in binaural beats as a technology. Now, whether it's regulated or not, that's another question. It's not, except for a few companies, which I will discuss. So in order to assess the effect potential of binaural beats, we're going to talk about that a lot today. We're going to ask 2 basic questions. The first of which is, can we predict their effects on neural brain rhythms? And can we predict the influence of binaural beats on the autonomic nervous system, or the ANS? So measuring these brain rhythms are a way of measuring the evidence of effects on our mind-body states, and measuring the ANS, which regulates our neural rhythms, including heart rate, digestion, and the fight or flight response, can help us understand the effects on those systems as well. So let's start measuring. Another thought to add there is that mainstream science does not yet clinically measure the pathways of energy in the body yet. So it's really valuable to us to be able to measure the effects that it has on the nervous system through both quantitative and qualitative measurements. So what I have up on the slide here is probably the most effective quantitative tool that we have for measuring brain waves. These tools were designed in the field of neuroscience, and they are used in really all of the fields that investigate clinical effects of binaural beats. So electroencephalography, EEG, is the main one. And this tool is used to track the electrical activity on the scalp to detect increases in neural connectivity. However, binaural beats are incredibly complex. So I've noted here a second tool, and there are many other tools, QEEG, it's a big list. But the second tool that I've noted here is, it's called multi-layer perceptron networks. So this is an artificial neural network that is applied to the EEG readings. And that helps us to measure complex and nonlinear data. helps us detect changes in cognitive processes and in moods. It's used for discrimination, pattern recognition, and empirical modeling. So I hope we see a lot more of this tool in future studies about binaural beats. I have one study that used it extensively to great effect. Another part of our quantitative toolkit are the measurements of the autonomic nervous system, which are most frequently done with heart rate variability, which is HRV, and that's used to measure the response of the autonomic nervous system through changes in the heartbeat, and galvanic skin response, or GSR, which is used to measure the intensity of the ANS response by measuring the moisture response of the skin. So that's really the quantitative toolkit. And then we have semi-quantitative or qualitative. These two tools largely come from the psychology studies, but again, as I say, they cross through all three of the fields. And so they could be questionnaires that could diagnose things like depression or anxiety or even states of consciousness. They could be cognitive tests or tasks for things like verbal short-term and long-term memory or focus or attention. Or they could just be diaries of self-reporting. So what I want to talk about here is our brain frequencies and cognitive states. These are the electrical activity on the scalp that we are measuring. And as you can see, there are frequencies and then there are cognitive states that they are reported to correspond to. These are naturally generated in our brain, and we are mimicking them with the binaural beats and inducing the conscious states that they represent. These particular numbers come from the field of sleep research. Sometimes you'll see the numbers slightly different, but I find the sleep research numbers to be very reliable. So obviously the faster frequencies are on top and the slower frequencies on bottom, and they would correspond to brain states that would reflect that. So for example, in my practice, I open always pre-pandemic with a vibroacoustic sound bed treatment and a binaural beats track on the headphones with theta in it. So theta, as you can see, are slower brain waves, is known for a more meditative inward focused state. And it also creates a great state of receptivity. So that's a really nice tool, an opener to use when you're about to work with someone and you want to just have a rapport and a receptive energy. It's used for many other things. That's just one example. I've also used, let's see, I've used beta for a couple of kids that I worked with that were ADHD, to help them focus. And in one case, a child needed to learn his football plays. He was having a really hard time dropping his football because he couldn't remember the plays and he would get nervous and he would get anxious. And we reviewed the plays over and over using a beta track. And I'm absolutely pleased to report that he started catching the balls and making touchdowns by the end of the season, which is a really big deal for a 13-year-old boy. Then as you get up towards the faster frequencies like gamma for concentration, I personally use gamma and have used it with clients for when I am reading very long neuroscience studies, for example, anything that requires that you stay focused and in an epiphany mind state where you really need to be not only reading, but deeply understanding and putting the pieces together. So those are some of the ways that you can use some of these frequencies. I personally don't respond to the delta frequency for sleep, but I know many that do. I need to hear a tape, like a spoken voice, but it has to be a male voice. Those low frequencies put me to sleep. So I would listen to a book on tape or something like that. But delta has been clinically proven to support sleep. So as I said, each brain is different, and we'll talk about that a lot. And what is really important for you as you're listening to this is to listen to your own body's information, if you're using binaural beats, about what is working for you or your clients or what is not. So let's move on. Oh, one last point here. I do want to say, very important, the brain produces multiple frequencies at once. So these particular frequencies may be dominant in specific states, but that does not mean they're the only frequencies that are there. So the most successful binaural beat formulas are multiple frequency formulas. So context. Really, human beings have been using repetitive rhythms such as drumming, dancing, and chanting as a healing modality since before written history. And we have some studies on the efficacy of rhythm in terms of entraining our brainwaves into the desired state. Rhythmic repetition entrains the brain, and it causes the brain to follow the rhythm or frequency that is presented. So repetitive rhythms of binaural beats. So binaural beats are under the umbrella of rhythmic modalities. Binaural beats were first discovered in 1839 by German physicist H.W. Dove. And as we mentioned, the modern investigations were published by physicist Gerald Oster in 1973. It's a short history. Now I want to turn to the auditory pathways, how sound travels through the brain. And we're going to start with the way that we hear regular sound. And this to me is one of the most fascinating parts of this inquiry. The auditory brain is nothing short of exceptional. It's the interface between the unseen, invisible, mechanical sound vibrations in our universe and our nervous system. Our ability to process these sound waves and make use out of the data, many would say, is a primary survival skill. Remember, hearing is the first sense that develops in utero. And the ability to hear and decide what is coming at you is clearly a survival skill, because you may need to run. Or in the case of sound healing, you may need to just relax and enjoy. So let's start. So we have waves, sound waves in the air. They're going to go through 4 transductions, 4 changes before they get to your auditory cortex. They start in the airwaves, then they reach the bones of your ear, and then a Morse-like tapping begins. Okay, so then they become like a mechanical wave. Then it goes into the fluid of your cochlea, and then you have a water wave. And then it becomes, once it reaches your brainstem, it becomes an electrical signal. Then it's an electrical neural signal in your brain, in your auditory pathway. And as you can see, that's about where the blue dot is, the cochlear nucleus. And then that electrical signal begins to travel up the brainstem. So past the green dots, that's the superior olivary nuclei. And then at the brainstem level right there is where you process sound on basically 3 levels, as a reflex and or in the auditory cortex and in other brain areas. So the arrival of the message, it may first trigger the reflex and then cause you to move, or it may go straight to the auditory cortex. Or you could jump and turn your head or use your voice. All those things happen right there. So the decoding of the basic signals is an important part of this process, and it happens right there. And those are duration, intensity, and frequency. We know that as soon as we've hit that middle brainstem. So then the next stop occurs in the thalamus, which is kind of up above where those yellow dots are. It's right on top of the brainstem. It's an oval mass of gray substance. And the thalamus integrates all of the sensory systems in the body. So it functions as a factor in the preparation of all of our responses as well. Now, then the sound signal continues out to the auditory cortex. So you can see it goes from the yellow dots out to the red. And that's where we actually hear. We don't hear in the ears, we hear in the brain, in the auditory cortex. So that's the path of regular sound. Binaural beats do not take that pathway, and we do not fully know the pathway that they take. We know that they come in and are processed in the superior olivary nuclei, the green dots, and we know that they end up at the auditory cortex, at the red dots. What happens in the middle? So we have a theory from F. Holmes Atwater, who used to direct the Monroe Institute. He's really the leading researcher and proponent of this theory. And I would say that most of the field agrees with him at this point, and I do as well. And we'll talk about why. So what is the RAS? The RAS is a reticular activating system, our non-primary auditory pathway. It's a second way that we process sounds. It's a neural network that's located in the brainstem, and it is responsible for modulating our three basic states of consciousness: awake, light sleep, and deep sleep. So sound affects the RAS, which affects the central nervous system. And as such, sound modulates the central nervous system. That's known science. The RAS also takes signals from all of our senses, external, environmental sensory stimuli, as well as internal. And so sound is just one of the sensory stimuli that's being processed here. We do not have evidence yet that binaural beats are processed here, and that's one of the things that we need to find out for certain. So here's what's interesting about the RAS. It projects neurotransmitters to the hypothalamus, the thalamus, and directly to the cortex. So if you trace this pathway, what you can understand is that the hypothalamus, for example, contains the SCN, the suprachiasmatic nuclei, SCN. Those are the location that visual entrainment has been documented. So that's known science. We do not know if there is any auditory entrainment, induction, sonic induction, but visual entrainment has been recorded there. In addition, the hypothalamus regulates your circadian rhythms. That's also the work of the SCN. So what you can see is that this is a complex system of interrelationships. Here's a few of them listed on this page. Things that the hypothalamus influences, things that the autonomic nervous system influences. So what we want to look for as we're going through all the data for all of these studies is, are the binaural beats affecting these neural rhythms? These are all rhythms controlled by the nervous system. So one other thing that I want to point out here is that this becomes a very interesting opportunity for researching consciousness. So this field defines consciousness as an arousal and awareness of environment and self. So we're becoming aware, right? And that is achieved through the action of the RAS on the brainstem and on the cerebral cortex. So again, we do not yet have the sophistication to scientifically, clinically map energetic pathways, pathways of consciousness. What can we measure? Well, we can measure this. So the other thing that I want to say here is my final observation is that the RAS sleep arousal states correlate to the brain states that we are measuring. If you think of them as gears, the fastest gears, gamma and beta, correlate to the waking states. And the middle gears, alpha, theta, correlate to slow wave sleep or resting. And the slow gear, delta, correlates to dreaming, REM. So again, I say there's enough interesting correlations here to substantiate further research into binaural beats and the reticular activating system. All right, let's move on to some definitions now. Here are some sound healing terms that we're going to use to pull together a nice definition of what is sound healing. What are we trying to accomplish by using sound on the human biosystem? And we have vibration, frequency, energy, rhythms, and consciousness. I'm using the Jean Gebser definition of consciousness, which is consciousness is awareness or the creation of a relationship. So this definition, which is David's definition, and it's my favorite one, sound healing is the educated and conscious use of the energy of sound to reach identified goals and promote wellness in the human system, including the expansion of consciousness. Okay, so we're looking at binaural beats as a tool that could accomplish this. So the one thing that I want to say further about sound healing is that it is based on the two principles of entrainment and resonance. And David actually has a nice textbook that talks at length about those two principles. But for our purposes, we're really going to think about them as mechanisms or processes that direct the body's use of energy to organize and regulate the rhythms of the body, okay? These are processes that we have for making energy available. So entrainment, let's start with entrainment. These are very basic definitions. And again, they are just focusing on our lens of what energy is becoming available and why. You could spend a lifetime on either one of these two words. So starting on the left, the physics definition of entrainment is when one rhythm takes over another rhythm, causing it to synchronize. So for example, you have X, that's a stronger rhythm with a bigger amplitude, and Y, a weaker rhythm with a smaller amplitude. So when entrainment happens and X entrains Y, it can only increase the available energy to the level of amplitude that it possesses. So you can get an increase of energy in the system, but only as much as from the weaker wave to the stronger wave, okay? So we have been asking, is binaural beats a case of entrainment? Well, binaural beats doesn't have the energy increase that you see when a stronger wave takes over a weaker one. There just isn't. There's a frequency following response, but it's much weaker than an entrainment response. So we would say, well, binaural beats is not a case of entrainment. But what is it? So I want to be clear, rhythm entrains. There is very clear evidence for sonic induction, entrainment. But binaural beats do not qualify. That rhythm is not a case of entrainment. So now let's look at resonance. Resonance is an increase of amplitude when an input matches the natural frequency of the system. So in this case, you have two waves that are the same resonant frequency. And when they join together, they are additive. They create double what they were. Now, resonance is a far more powerful energy, makes more energy available, I should say, because the way this process works is that the energy can keep adding to the system, and it can keep adding and keep adding and keep adding. Now, there is a point where you can't add anymore, and that's when the system reaches its threshold, and then the system breaks apart. So the example of that is the opera singer who sings the correct resonant frequency of the glass, and the glass explodes. That's what we experience when a system reaches its threshold of the amount of energy that becomes available to it. So again, what we want to understand from this is, can this energy that we are generating be used to heal? And of these different processes of handling energy, how do binaural beats fit in? So as we said, binaural beats only show a very small energetic increase, a frequency following response. So right now, I think the strongest hypothesis is really stochastic resonance, which is a form of resonance in which a weak signal is boosted by adding white noise, which has equal energy at a range of frequencies. So that has been discussed in the field. Some people have rejected that theory. Some people still hold it. But both the description of binaural hearing, if you look in the actual clinical studies, in their data and in their conclusions, both binaural hearing as a process, which is enhanced by background noise, and the description of the studies is more aligned to stochastic resonance than to anything else. So we're going to keep that as the hypothesis for our study and as a suggested research direction. So let's look at our methodology now. We'll discuss what is a transdisciplinary review, the data analysis that I undertook in this study, and then we will ask the question, what actually makes a good binaural beats study? So that information will be valuable for you if you are a creator of binaural beats or a researcher of binaural beats, or just wanting to know the validity of this tool as a healing tool. So the transdisciplinary review method was an excellent choice for studying binaural beats because binaural beats are complex. And transdisciplinarity really is a form of research or scholarship that developed to address the increasing complexity of the problems that we face in today's world. It's an approach to exploring the many parts of the whole to deliver an integrated perspective on existing research. So for example, in this study, we'll be integrating research from 3 different fields: neuroscience, psychology, and health. We'll be integrating quantitative and qualitative research onto a continuum. We'll be integrating the study of the mind and the body into one unified energetic field that relates to and talks to each other. So the closest example I can give you to this type of scholarship is interdisciplinary scholarship, in which, say, you have 2 fields, like I am in neuroscience and I reach over to the field of psychology, and together we create information. Transdisciplinarity is slightly different. It takes one question, an inquiry question, and says that you can visit whatever field you need to further and broaden your knowledge of this question. So it really is like the center point, the hub in a wheel, and you can expand that wheel as far as you need to go to get the knowledge that you need for your question. It casts a very big net. Sometimes it's hard to know when to stop researching, though. So the databases that I used for this inquiry were the library databases, OneSearch, Google Scholar. And the keywords that I used were actually very interesting. I find that the right word is as important as the right frequency, because it's the same thing, really, huh? And I spent a couple years in sound healing not finding any significant research until I used the word sound therapy. And then I was able to access large amounts of scientific research. There's a rift in the field that really needs to be addressed. And all the information needs to be collected in one place. And I know that David is actively doing that through conferences like this, through the medical research group and foundation. And it's really the main thing that needs to happen in the sound healing field right now. So these are the criteria that I used to select studies. And basically, they had to be recent. All science has to be recent because it moves so fast. And they had to have at least of the 12 data points of the 18 that I used in my analysis. I came up with 26 studies, 7 in neuroscience, 11 in psychology, and 8 in health. There were another 5 that I could have used, and probably another 5 more by the time you see this presentation. The field is expanding very quickly, but this was a good size sample set. And the data analysis that we used was voting type questions, sorting type questions, comparison, holding the data up to recognize markers of success, and finding emerging patterns. So that's developing a unique overview of the material based on the data that you've been able to pull together. And I asked what makes a good binaural beat study using those 26 studies and 18 data points. And I'm going to highlight 6 of those points here for you today: the study outcomes, the methods of measurement, the brain frequencies and cognitive states that were selected, the duration of the binaural beat treatment, inter-individual differences like gender or introversion, and relaxation protocols. These are the 18 data points that I compared. Each of these data points could potentially make or break the study, which is why both a transdisciplinary approach is important and a sophisticated data analysis process, such as artificial intelligence or other complicated statistical analysis processes. I've seen study authors use both with success. So let's start with the first point, study outcomes. Once we lay this all out on the table, we can see how studies are constructed to achieve these positive outcomes. But basically, 20 of these studies showed effect. And then we have the ones that didn't work. 6 studies showed some or no effect. This is a huge question. Why do some studies not work? And I find as I do my research, often articles or journalists will find one study that shows that there are no results and then make a pronouncement about the field that binaural beats are not real. And it's very misleading because often the studies that don't work have managed to turn up excellent information, just helping us establish the parameters of what binaural beats are or are not, and what they can or cannot do. But we will talk more about this at the end of the presentation. So this is just a quick look, and it was all 26 studies went through this data process. I just wanted to give you a quick idea of how complex the studies are. There's also another 6 data points that were summarized in paragraph form, but I do want to walk you through one study so you can see what it looks like. So Jura-Kitayarkorn and Wansawat, those are the study authors, they design really intelligent studies. I've got 2 of their studies in my study set. And so we're going to start on the left. You'll see the orange text and move left to right. And then we'll go to the second row beneath and move left to right. So they studied the brain state of delta in 3 hertz. So they used a carrier frequency of 250 hertz. That might look like 250 hertz in the left ear and 253 in the right ear. Remember, you can have the carrier frequency anywhere, and there is data emerging to show what the different carrier frequencies themselves can affect. right? So not only do you have all the different brain frequencies that you can test, you also have all the different carrier frequencies that you can test. So you're starting to get an idea of how many moving pieces there are. Then you have the number of binaural beat repetitions, that's 1. And the time, they used the binaural beat for 5 hours, because this was a sleep study. And the decibel level, which is 60. And the sample set, moving down to the lower left-hand corner, 24 participants. And of those, 11 were female and 13 were male. That also becomes relevant. Of a mean age of 24.12, which is interestingly less relevant because Oster found that binaural hearing does not deteriorate with age, as does regular hearing. So that's an interesting one. They found that the delta frequency supported sleep. And this was a measurement of a body effect. And the tools they used, so this is an example of a transdisciplinary tool selection. They used EEG, which again is the electrical activity on the scalp, EOG, which is, that records eye activity, EMG, that records muscle activity, and BRUMS, which is essentially a questionnaire, a mood questionnaire. So this study was successful and it was very well constructed, which is one of the reasons for that. And that delta brain state, 3 hertz, that's really slow. I also just want to call your attention to the fact that all of these brain states, sound waves are relatively slow compared to many of the other waves that are out there. Like delta is 3 hertz. Your brain is, so it means there's 3 cycles happening in a second, okay? Violet light, for example, is 7.5 times 10 to the 14. That's 14 zeros. That's how fast light is. So these brain waves that we're measuring are like 3. So when you are in a state of delta rest, you're going very, very slowly. I find that very interesting. So let's move to our second marker here. And this is a central marker, and that's brainwave frequencies. This shows that this study set focused largely on the theta brainwaves, which are very popular because they can produce a trance-like state. And they also are very popular for meditation, as I described before. However, multi-layered frequencies are reported to be the most effective, yet they're the least represented here. So what I want to point out is that that information has somehow not yet hit the clinical study research groups. They're still using single frequencies to try to gain effect. So the point is, we're not reaching the potential of what binaural beats can do. So here's another marker. What measurement is most frequently taken? So what we can see is that neural brain waves were measured in 9 of the studies, the ANS in 3, both in 2 studies, and other, so 12 studies didn't even measure those 2 things. They measured like EBRs, eye blink rates, or EOGs or EMGs. They measured some specific function of the body, or questionnaires or tasks. And so what I want to draw your attention to here is that there is no standardization in the field. It makes it very difficult to compare results. We don't have apples to apples. I also want to say that within the tools used, there are different analysis methods undertaken. Some study authors would analyze their EEG readings in one way, some would analyze them in another way, so you can't really compare those results. So another example of no standardization with which to compare data. This is an important marker, minutes exposed to binaural beats. So what we have learned is that duration is a key factor in achieving effects. And we have 3 studies that show that duration affects potential outcome, one of which is a meta-analysis of 35 studies. And the time frame that you really need is 8 to 10 minutes to begin to see effects in an EEG reading. So the 2 things I want you to see here about these 26 studies are that 1, there's no consistency. Everybody is using a different length of time. Obviously, the sleep study needs to use the 5 hours, so there need to be categories. But in a sleep study, you should see a consistent, standardized number of hours. And then for the other studies, you should see a consistent number of minutes. I also want to call your attention to the fact that 9 of these studies fall on or beneath the 8-minute duration treatment. So again, we are not maximizing the effect potential of the beats. Relaxation protocol, another really important marker. We can see 18 studies did not use any protocol and 8 studies did. Why is that important? Well, the binaural beats, they're not hypnosis. They don't come along and take your system over and force your body into a state. So remember our definition of stochastic resonance, a signal strengthener or booster. It means they're taking an existing signal and strengthening it. Right? How do you create an existing signal? You give yourself instructions. You say, I am going to relax now. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to close my eyes. I'm going to focus on my meditation center. And I plan to relax for the next 20 minutes. So you have started your brain waves, your brain signals in that direction. And then you turn the binaural beats on and you enhance that, right? We have plenty of studies that show that the brain communicates with itself by frequency. When you feel fear, a frequency, I believe it's 4 hertz. It's either 4 or 6, no, it's 4 hertz. This is not binaural beats. This is just a frequency detected in the brain. It's detected in both the frontal cortex and the amygdala. So the fear happens in the mouse, and immediately those 2 brain areas start communicating at 4 hertz. We know the brain communicates with brain waves. That's how it sends information. So the binaural beats would come in and they would strengthen that signal. So we do have one really impressive study because of its size, 109 participants, that found that alpha theta binaural beats are capable of inducing a trance state of consciousness. They are, but that the subjective experiences are mainly influenced by preliminary instructions. So this is the study that controls for the relaxation protocol. And based on this information, it's highly recommended that a relaxation protocol be used and reported and standardized. So now we come to our conclusion. Let's look at the study outcomes. Why are there studies with no results? Do the marketing claims have any basis? 3 really interesting emergent themes and recommendations for future research. So now we return to the 6 studies. In comparing these studies to the broader field, we can guess at how to refine them going forward. So there are some studies here that have factors of insufficient time exposure. Some have the incorrect brain frequency selected for the task, like they've selected theta to help with a focusing task, which is just not going to work. Or the incorrect task is selected. They are asking binaural beats to do something that they can't do. Binaural beats are rhythmic. Rhythm will affect our rhythmic systems. So yes, of course, it affects our nervous system. Our nervous system is rhythmic. Our cardiovascular system is rhythmic. Our respiratory system is rhythmic. those things, and the endocrine system is rhythmic. So those things can be impacted, but really not so much like healing damaged nerves. I would use a different technology or tool for that. Well, actually, as of yet, we don't know how to heal damaged nerves. I'm first in line for that. So moving on, studies did not account for inter-individual differences, and studies used very small sample sets, which is problematic if you've got everybody at the same age. And then sometimes there's potential incorrect audio participation, like the participants are complaining that the audio, the binaural beats are unpleasant. Oster measured a binaural beats to be roughly 3 decibels. It's like a whisper. A properly presented track, you would not hear binaural beats. Plus, the clinical studies show that they work better when they're masked, like with pink noise. So many of these studies have no masking, but you shouldn't be hearing the binaural beats. There's no standardization or regulation about the creation of binaural beats. So you don't know what audio they used. That's a problem. So I also want to mention here our last data point, and that's about the inter-individual differences. For example, the Lavati study, it had only 20 female participants with a mean age of 50. And that level of similarity can be problematic because, as we described, the binaural beats are perceived differently by women based on their time in of the cycle, in their month cycle. So if you have 20 women at age 50, and you're using the same carrier frequency for them all, you don't know, you may be using a frequency they don't respond to. You may be, in some way, it's not enough diversity to really say. And so you do have to have diversity, both male, female, and age range to be able to account for these inter-individual differences. Like another study has shown that our introversion or extroversion can determine how we respond to binaural beats. So she measured eye blink rates, which measure our dopamine levels. And so you learn whether someone has introverted brain processing tendencies or extroverted brain processing tendencies. And one of those groups is more susceptible to binaural beats. That's the introverted group. So there's a lot more to be discovered before we can fully say whether a technology is being used at its full potential or useless. It's not an informed conclusion. So are these claims, returning to these claims that we talked about at the beginning of the presentation, are they backed by these clinical studies? So we found out that 1, binaural beats do affect our brain states and the ANS. Out of 26 studies, 20 had positive findings, 5 had mixed, and 1 had no finding. 2, binaural beats enhance our conscious awareness and meditation. We have 3 studies that demonstrated that. 3, they do synchronize our brain hemispheres. We have 3 solid studies that demonstrate that, and they affect our well-being. So we're returning to those neural rhythms that we looked at, governed by the hypothalamus or the ANS. And what we see, and I'm going to start over on the left and read down the first column and then the second, that clinically, binaural beats have effects on your sleep rhythms, anxiety, stress levels, brain function. Now up to the second column, your attention and cognition, memory, your nervous system, trance and meditation, and analgesic. They even help reduce the perception of pain, probably because we experience pain in our nervous system. So these are the 3 themes that really most stood out to me. Firstly, that is the opportunity to explore the therapeutic benefits of synchronization, the integration of brain hemispheres. There are many therapeutic modalities that already successfully use this knowledge. For example, EMDR or neurologic music therapy. There is much more to learn and much to be said already about the ability to synchronize your brain hemispheres and the clarity of thoughts, of organized thought that becomes available to you at that moment, the increased awareness and ability for growth and expansion. Secondly, brainwaves are a field effect. This becomes an enormous opportunity to study energy fields in the brain and neural consciousness, particularly with the emergence of artificial intelligence technologies. And then lastly, binaural beats are perhaps a stochastic resonance technology. So this becomes an opportunity to expand the horizon of vibrational medicine, of our knowledge about resonance technologies and how we might make available energy available for healing. So I have 4 broad research suggestions for the field. The first is we really need to establish standardized experimental protocols. As you can see, we're not comparing apples to apples right now. Secondly, proper environmental protocol. Without those suggestions, you are not at all seeing the potential effects of the beats. Thirdly, an understanding of the natural fluctuations, both our circadian and our ultradian rhythms. Circadian are rhythms that happen in more than a 24-hour time period. Ultradian are rhythms that happen in less than a 24-hour time period. And a better understanding of our inter-individual differences, like some of the qualities that I mentioned to you. And then lastly, multi-layer binaural beat rhythms that actually mimic the brain waves that the brain produces in desired states. Now, I've seen a lot of work on the multi-layered brain waves that we generate under meditation from early pioneers like Maxwell Cade or Anna Wise. These are not binaural beat studies. These were brain frequency studies of meditators who were able to get into very enlightened states. And these authors created really beautiful diagrams of all the different brain frequencies and the shapes that they made in those different states. So we need to see something like that happen in the binaural beats field. Specifically, here are 10 specific directions that somebody, maybe you, will go in to help further this fascinating knowledge. 1, separate the effects of rhythm from the effects of hemispheric synchronization. Those are 2 different things. The deeper that you look under this magnifying glass, and binaural beats are not having this standard entrainment induction effect that other rhythms are having. They're doing something different. And how does that resonance effect that they are doing relate to the hemispheric synchronization, which is a product of regulating those separate signals? So that's a very cool exploration. Secondly, determine if binaural beats are processed in the RAS. I find the RAS fascinating. There's a whole neural network there with enormous potential for understanding states of consciousness. And if binaural beats can be a tool to help us understand that, that's a huge category right there. 3, determine if stochastic resonance is present. I mentioned that a little bit before. 4, investigate any entrainment or beat induction in the SCN. So one thing that we are on the verge of knowing is how does beat induction entrain our brain. We know that for visual light, the light comes in through our eyes and hits the optic nerve, and the optic nerve sends those signals to the hypothalamus, to the SCN, the suprachiasmatic nuclei, and that regulates our circadian rhythms, our daily rhythms. That's why it's so important to see that sun first thing in the morning, right? Let that light in your eyes and get a healthy 24-hour rhythm going. That helps your sleep cycles. So what is the process for sound? We don't know that yet. It has to be discovered. Number 5, so this is one of my 3 favorites. And this is the one that I opened with. Design and test a binaural beat prescriptive evaluation, accounting for inter-individual differences and offering protocols. So it's like getting a brain thumbprint, a brain print. And we would be able to specifically create a healing audio for each person. And I mentioned that study again, it's the Gantt study of 76 veterans suffering from PTSD. And they had very positive effects from their binaural beats treatments. And Gantt frequently mentioned that this is an excellent modality because there's, first of all, it's inexpensive, easily accessible. You can take it everywhere with you, and there's no stigma involved. These are soldiers, these are veterans, these are nurses in the field. They need something that is not a big blaring, hi, I'm getting help right now, something they can take with them. So it's a great delivery system, but it needs to be personalized. So that's the thing I would most like to see. Number 6, identify which carrier frequencies are helpful in various conditions, right? So we know that's a factor, but we're not exactly sure yet of the full extent. 7, identify real multi-layer brainwave patterns, design binaural beats and test the conditions they help. That kind of goes with number 5. Number 8, explore measuring energetic fields and binaural pathways with AI. This is a great opportunity to both develop these artificial neural networks and learn more about energy fields and learn more about binaural beats all at the same time. And that's one of my other favorites because we are really on the frontier of being able to clinically, scientifically identify these pathways. And that will open up so much, not just for helping individuals to heal and reduce their stress. They say the Institute for Stress says that 90% of our illnesses are caused by our stress. So it's not just an opportunity to help a vast number of people with a vast number of issues, but it's something much bigger, right? It's really the ability to authenticate this field of energy healing, of vibrational medicine, which has impact for the practitioners. You can get licensure once you have clinically demonstrated the efficacy. So that's a big one. Number 9, investigate benefits of hemispheric synchronization. We spoke about that. And number 10, investigate the duration of binaural beat benefits. So we do have clinical studies that show that there are benefits. And what we don't have are time-lapse studies that show over time, how long did those benefits stay? Were they permanent? How many times did that therapy need to be repeated? So that's a body of work that's still missing. Okay, review. If there are 3 things that I would like you to remember about binaural beats, they are the following. 1, binaural beats, the difference in 2 frequencies can resonate specific frequencies in the brain. 2, neural consciousness is a rhythmic state. And 3, informed selection and proper application of binaural beat frequencies can induce effects, including correlative states of consciousness. So here I promised you I would recommend some companies. These are companies that create binaural beats that are brain research based. They've been around for 50 years. And they are solidly researched and are as close as you're going to come to regulated right now. Holosync.com, that's Bill Harris's company, who left us recently, but not before he made a huge contribution to the world. Hemisync.com, that was Monroe's brainchild, and it's now broken off. It's a separate company under a different ownership. And iawake.com. That's a couple, the Dupuis that run that. All terrific products. So the references, thank you to all of the researchers who made all of this powerful information available to us. I will read each of these references to you one by one. Just kidding. But if you want my reference list, please contact me. I'll put my contact information up again. And I want to say a big heartfelt thank you again to David Gibson, who tirelessly works for the benefit of all, bringing us all together, creating these opportunities, and raising the entire field of sound healing. And thank you to the Sound Healing Research Foundation, who is funding this conference, the Sound and Vibration for the Brain Conference, all projects of David's. And thank you to our partnering network. I believe Lauren Gailey and New Earth One Network have joined with us to help create these seamless online digital presentations for you for the online conference this year. And again, here is my contact information. You can reach me at sound-medicine.com, Elizabeth at sound-medicine.com, or on LinkedIn, Sound-Medicine. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and wish you all a wonderful rest of the conference. And here we have David back.
Oh, excellent, excellent. Oh my God, this is so great, because I've seen so many people say, yeah, there's research that show that binaural beats don't work, right? And it's just so much more complex than that. And I've always thought, you know, what are they doing? I mean, and this is just excellent. It really clears it all up. I appreciate all the detailed work you've done on this. There's a couple of things I was wanted to ask about. You know, my understanding is that you can entrain the brain with just a rhythm. You could just go ba, 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 right? And it's when you actually listen to the left and right that you get the second benefit of the left and right brain synchronization, right? You have to wear headphones, right, to get that benefit. Was there very much research on, it sounds like there's very little research on the left and right brain synchronization, which is separate than the delta, theta, alpha, beta, and gamma.
Yeah, so in testing, so I have 3 studies really that conclusively show, they call it cross-frequency activity, where they can see the brain communicating with itself across the corpus callosum. And that is, and it is separate. So yes, there are clinically demonstrated studies that rhythm entrains the brain. And that's one thing that, see, it gets really interesting as you get in close. Rhythm is one piece of the puzzle, one thread of that braid, okay? And so we know that entrainment is happening there. That can be shown. Now, the separate thing that's happening, you have the binaural beats, and you're correct. You have to have the headphones on, because as soon as you don't have the separate signals, that binaural hearing auditory pathway is not there. What we're doing is we're activating an auditory pathway that exists in our auditory brain. So binaural beats, here's the question for you. Do they exist in nature? Not really. So
Unless you have two hummingbirds flying on both sides of your
yes, 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 that's a great example. And so those two hummingbirds, right? Immediately, or any noise, immediately your binaural hearing kicks into place, and you immediately start to locate, and then that signal immediately goes to your motor cortex, and you either voice or you turn your head. And then if it's a hummingbird, you say, oh, how sweet. And if it's a dinosaur, you run. So that's the sequence. But it's a short exposure to a binaural beat. Binaural beats, these long, lengthy 15, 20, 30-minute tracks of binaural beats can only exist in the studio. We can only create them with tone generators. Right. So we've opened a whole new portal into the ability to understand and manipulate, work with binaural hearing by artificially generating what exists in nature on much shorter spans. I believe also this is a big problem in electrical engineering. You have to be able to handle that kind of beating that comes along in a system that has a extended activity. You have to be able to manage that.
Cool.
But yeah, with no headphones, no binaural beats. And it is the brain's response, it is the brain seeking to regulate itself that is the hemispheric synchronations, starting with the actual physical function. Because if you have two different signals, right, your left hemisphere, your left auditory brain, and your right auditory brain has to talk to each other. I'm hearing this, I'm hearing this. What do? We say it's 7 hertz. Oh, okay, we're going to interpret that as a meditative state. That itself is integration. Before you even get into the more complicated workings of the RAS, which is likely what's happening.
Right. So did you see any research on tuning the binaural beats to the person's natural rhythm? Because my understanding from the people I've talked to is that's critical. It's way better when you actually, tune it to the person. And so all this research where they're not tuning it to your natural rhythm, because if you want to, it just makes sense. If you really want to entrain somebody into their delta, well, everybody's delta is a little bit different. Everybody's theta is a little bit different. To tune it to them seems like critical to really make it more effective. So all the studies that didn't do that, I think you should just throw them out.
You make an excellent point. And what also goes under that header is that half of these studies didn't even report the decibel level. So what you have is you have a lot of people in the fields of psychology and neuroscience and health studying something in the sound field and not recognizing what's actually important. You are in the sound field and you're like, wait a minute, these are the most important things. You're not even talking about them. So that knowledge has not really infiltrated, if you will, and the knowledge of the individual brain print has not infiltrated. There's a person you and I both know, Dr. Jeffrey Thompson, who really excels at that, getting you on his chiropractic table, hooking you up, and then finding your exact frequency. I'm E minus 17.
Oh, cool.
That's my exact frequency. So, to your point, the field is not at a sophisticated enough level to do that, but the sophisticated researchers like Atwater will absolutely say exactly what you're saying.
Cool. Well, the other aspect also, Jeffrey is one of our presenters as well, so we'll be talking with him. But another aspect is when you talk about multi-layer, doing multiple binaural beats at once, it seems like very problematic because when you're in a certain brainwave state, different parts of the brain are in different frequencies, right? And how does the brain know to split out all of those rhythms that are going through the ears? They're all mixed together, right? So it seems like to use electrodes on the brain and map it out to the different parts of the brain instead of going through the ears would actually make more sense.
I love talking to a sound person. It's great questions. So, yes, Yeah, and Atwater had a great explanation of this. Really, there's a rhythm for every cavity in your brain. The left hemisphere has a rhythm, the right hemisphere has a rhythm, and all the little organs and all the little places, they're all making rhythms. I gave an example in the presentation of the frontal cortex and the amygdala being entrained on a 4 hertz rhythm when we experience fear. They found that in mice.
Wow.
Yeah, the brain speaks to itself in frequency. That's how it communicates data. And which is one of my favorite studies that I uncovered in all of this. But so what are you going to do? I like the scalp measurement very much for that reason, because you can measure the temporal lobe, you can measure the parietal lobe, you can midbrain. I am not an EEG specialist. Maybe you can ask one of them, but I think you can isolate pretty much every component of the brain with that measurement technique, and that would give you much better information. Now, I will say, I don't know that you need to get it perfect. But I myself make binaural beats for my music, and what I find is that 2 beats two together makes a really nice rhythm. 3 together is as much as I can take. Once I get to 4, it's cacophony for me. I'm uncomfortable. So my guess is, and this is just based on someone that has experimented themselves, this is not a study, this is not known data, is that it's probably 2 or 3 waves that are the most successful.
So out of all of this study that could be done, what do you see that where this could go to really transform people in, like the lowest hanging fruit, or what we could do in the next 10 to 20 years? How could we really, where do you see this where it would help the most? Specific issues, specific uses?
Yeah. Okay, so the lowest hanging fruit for me is the theta alpha for meditation, for receptivity, for rejuvenation. That's the nap in the middle of the day. That's resetting at the end of the day for a nice peaceful sleep. The gamma, probably it's a gamma beta blend for studying, for focus, for epiphany moments, for deeply integrating the material and being able to generate insights about it. And then for the attention deficit, that's also beta gamma. For helping someone to really come up and focus. It's sort of the same category. You would just use it for reading difficult material. I would use it for reading all of my neuroscience studies. That required intense focus. So I would have my gamma beats on. And then at the end of the day, I'd be sitting there with my theta beats, yes. And particularly for people, there's a lot of chronic fatigue and a lot of like long COVID, a lot of viral issues going on right now. The theta beats are so relaxing for a 20-minute pick-me-up in the middle of the day. If you're someone that deals with fatigue or illness and needs to generate like a second day for yourself. And then I know a lot of people use Delta for sleep. I would say that's the other big one. And I don't, it doesn't work for my brain. I like someone telling me a story, a male voice, a lower male voice. So it's a lower calming frequency and audible for 1 hour. And that's, if I'm having trouble sleeping, I use the human voice.
I'm thinking possibly we're starting to work with some dementia companies, and it could be really helpful for dementia, right? But, this is what I was thinking would be the coolest, though, is they say, that memory is at a certain frequency of your brainwave, right? There's certain memories are stored at a certain rhythm. And it'd be really cool to have in your phone binaural beats that would help you remember that person's name or remember anything, right? It's like, who are you? Oh, just a second. Oh, there, I now remember your name now.
That is an area that's clinically demonstrated. So you may be onto something. It does help you.
Cool.
Well, we know that music and rhythm in general helps you memorize anything. Your ABCs, anything you put into a song, you automatically increase your ability to remember.
Cool. Well, again, thank you for all of your detailed research and laying out how where to go on this, because I think it's like it's so funny because I think a lot of the people that are doing research in this area or using binaural beats or putting out binaural beats, they have no idea of all the detail that you just shared. And it's so critical to really move it forward and really to ground it more. So because there's so much illusion and so much misinformation, because it's really, truth is, it hasn't really been researched in a really standardized way, as you said. Right?
You make another great point, and that's why I am releasing my dissertation open source. So anybody can have access to it. Anybody can have access to this information to support their whatever their project is. And another point that comes to me from what you just said is that it's really crucial that we go out there as researchers and document these things and bring the validity and the gravitas to the sound healing field that it deserves. That was one of my major goals.
Well, thank you so much.
Oh, David, a blessing and a pleasure to be back with you.
Pleasure.
I look forward to seeing everyone else's presentations. It sounds really impressive. So thanks for having me.
Okay, take care. I'm going to play the closing video now.